everybody, to Gardening with Dale Small today on Lunch with Dodie. I'm so glad you could join us. Dale's answering your gardening questions, and I'm sure you have some. We have one of our attendees today had some questions about her tulip tree and aphids, and that was where our lively discussion was going. Please put your speaker, your mute button on, because we get mute your screen because you do get a lot of background noise. And then if you have a question, raise your hand, or Beth, just let us know if you have a question, because we can't see you, and that's perfectly fine. This format, you can come in as the physical with the picture or just audio. And there may be other people joining us as we go, but let's go ahead and have Dale finish telling us about the aphids in the tulip tree. Thank you, Anita, for your question.
Okay, yes, well, aphids are a common problem in a number of trees. Birches also are well known for getting them. The problem is the tree is so tall that it's difficult to spray. And so the other alternative would be to use a systemic insecticide, which are problematic because they're harmful to honeybees and other pollinizers. And the other thing would be to encourage various predatory things that go after aphids. There's lots and lots of things that eat the aphids. And we talked about ladybugs a little bit. Ladybugs are very effective, but the adult ladybird beetle is not really who you're after. You want her to lay her eggs, and she has this little alligator-looking larva, and those are really, really effective at eating the aphids. Some of the other insects that are really good at eating aphids are lacewings and the larvae of hoverflies. Hoverflies are those pollinizers that you think are bees at first, unless you get a really good look at them and their eyes are not quite right, and they fly a lot better than a bee should be able to fly. Those are actually hoverflies, and they're true flies rather than in the bee family. But their larvae are also excellent predators. So one thing I was mentioning a little bit earlier was to plant lots of lacy foliaged plants like fennel and some of the really lacy artemisias and things like that, things that have a very, very fluffy, lacy foliage, because that provides a place that a lot of these predatory insects like to hide. And so that'll give them sort of an air base to take off from, to go and go after the aphids in the tree. So, also I was wanting to double check which kind of tulip tree it is. Does it have like a four-pointed maple leaf? Is that what the leaf looks like, or is it just leaf-shaped?
They're four-pointed leaves, and it has yellow flowers that look like tulips.
Yeah, so that is the true tulip tree. It is in the magnolia family, but it's not a magnolia. It's a liriodendron.
Right.
The magnolias, like Soulangeana, are commonly called tulip trees because they look like tulips when they bloom, but they're not. But what you have is the real one, and they get very, very large.
It's a way. I mean, it was probably the height of my house when I moved in, and now it's probably 4 times as high, and that's 12 years.
When I lived in Portland, there was a large one in the next block. It wasn't even on the same block that I lived on, and I got leaves from it in my backyard.
Oh yeah, in the fall, everybody hates me around here.
So one other thing to be slightly cautious about with that tree is that it's known for having wood that will break in adverse conditions, like ice storms. So
yeah, the branches have fallen, some of them.
Yeah, you don't want to have it over where you park your car or over a building, because you can get damage from them. But if it's out in the open, they're a wonderful big landscape tree.
Oh, it's a beautiful shade tree. It shades my whole front porch, and it's wonderful. And everybody loves me in the summer because it brings shade, and everybody hates me in the winter because of the leaves when they fall. So,
Yeah, and they're distinctive, so they know where they came from.
Oh, yes. True.
So, Nellie, did you have any questions today?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I do.
Okay, Beth, what's going on?
I have a couple. One has to do with roses. And there are two of them. Well, actually, they're all older roses. Two of them are pretty big. One, which we think is a Mr. Lincoln, is really old. It's got almost trunks on it instead of branches. And they're not in a good place. And I wanted to get them out of there. And I have a neighbor across the way who wants to take them for her daughter. They just bought several acres out north of Kaiser. But when I wanted to move them, it was earlier in the cool spring, and I haven't been able to find anybody to do it. And now I'm thinking it's too late, it's too warm. When can I do that, and how might I find somebody to do that for me?
Well, you probably want to wait until after a good hard frost this fall, so October.
Okay, so I need to wait.
Roses don't transplant really well. If there's a sentimental reason for moving it, then it's worth giving it a shot. But in most cases, a rose is first cousin to a blackberry. And you have much better luck starting with a young, healthy start than trying to move an old one. You're going to have tap roots that you're going to lose. You may be able to get it to survive, but actually, even if it was a sentimental plant, I would probably try to take cuttings and propagate it that way rather than hoping that.
None of them are sentimental.
Yeah, they just don't transplant well. Instead of having a nice, spreading fibrous root system, there's a couple of big old tap roots that'll go off for China, and you're going to break those off, and so it's got to grow new roots, and so you have to hope that the vigor in the trunk that you have is enough to put out a new root system while supporting the foliage while it comes out again. And so unless there's sentimental reasons for it, I don't think they're probably not worth the effort.
Not worth transplanting. I had another question on a lavender, or two actually. I planted them in this little space in the front garden, smallish space. Oh, I don't know, 4 years ago maybe. And they were like a foot tall by not more than a foot wide then. If you would see them right now, I've got one that is halfway across the front brick path to my front porch. They are huge. The bees love them. I've got Bumblebee City over here, which makes me very happy. But I'm wondering, on the inside, they look kind of just woody and they're obviously not dead, or they wouldn't be blooming that way. What should I do to take care of those? Should I prune them?
Yeah, lavenders are kind of a semi-deserty type shrub in its natural habitat, and they can be pruned back, but you have to prune them within the area that still has the foliage. So you can trim them back a little bit, and then hope that they fluff out, and then you can trim them back further if you can get some fresh new growth coming out of the middle.
When would I do that?
But generally, we don't do a whole lot with them. But if they're lining a pathway or something, they should probably get a light shearing once a year, either fall or spring. Spring's probably best, late winter, spring, and
every year they've just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And you only want to cut halfway back into where the green foliage is. So that may not be as much as you want, but it will stimulate some further back down. So doing it 2 or 3 times, you should be able to get it to exactly where you want. But if you try to do it all in one cutting, good chance you'll kill some of the plants.
Well, I just wanted to take care of them, basically. And when I saw what they looks like on the inside, I didn't want to do something that would endanger its life.
Yeah, so if you cut all the leaves off, that does tend to kill them. So, but they will accommodate pruning. You just have to be patient and maybe prune to force it to do what you want to prune it to, not to try to prune it to what you want in the first time. So
just do a little bit in the fall.
Right, and like where it comes to the pathway, you might want to do that like a couple of times, fall and spring, but probably once a year would be adequate to keep it in shape.
Okay.
So Beth, is your
Hmm.
lavender like really long and tall? Is that what you're saying?
Oh,
Just spread
yeah,
out.
it's probably, oh, I don't know, hang on. I would imagine because the flower spikes are just all over it this year. It's just a beautiful year for it.
Yeah,
Um, that's probably, they're up the tip of those at least 3 feet, maybe more like 3.5.
cool.
Uh, yeah, I was really surprised at what's happened with these two. The one behind it, closer to the porch, is a little smaller. It's not the gargantua the way the one is up towards the sidewalk. But yeah, and it's
There's many
probably
many cultivars of lavender, and so some are quite small and compact, but others will get very large.
yeah. I had no idea this one would, because width-wise, it's about what it is height. It's like this big ball, kind of.
Yeah.
Um,
Now you can deadhead after the wave of blooming is over, and just kind of shear back those long whips that don't actually have any leaves on them. There's flowers, stem, and then it goes down to the branch where there's leaves. You can cut off that whole flower stem just to kind of
mhm.
tidy up the plant, and that'll oftentimes get them to put out additional waves of blossoming.
So trim them back
Oh,
to
okay.
where the leaves are, or all the way down?
Well, right now, I mean, at the end of blooming, just cut it back to where the leaves start.
Oh, okay.
Just cut off those bare stems that has a flower on the end. And that's never a problem for the plant. I mean, you can do that when they're in bloom, just to bring in some flowers for to enjoy them. But when you're pruning the plant back to control its shape and size, then you're cutting into the foliage, and you only want to cut halfway into what foliage you have until you start seeing new foliage coming out at the base. Oftentimes, what happens, you kind of cut back half the leaf surface that the plant had, and so it says, oh my gosh, I need to put out some more. And so it'll make those branches try to grow again, but it also frequently will try to make it form brand new branches from the base of the plant, which are the ones that are nicer for you because they'll have the more compact habit. And when that starts to happen, then you can cut back more and let that new foliage take over.
Definitely going to be doing that this fall, and maybe a little bit next spring too. That I'm just mainly what I choose to grow has to do with bees, and that I hadn't seen any around for a while this year. I guess because it was so cloudy and cool, and now they are in the lavender, like, bonsai. And they're all over it, and I just love to stand out there, and they'll just let me stand really close and watch them, and yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I particularly pay attention to what are the plants that the bumblebees and the hummingbirds like.
Yep.
And the bumblebees in particular, because they're the #1 pollinizer for the vegetables that I want pollinized. They do better on the tomatoes and the peppers and the cucumbers than the honeybees do. And so I like to have lots of things that the bumblebees like. They're particularly fond of oregano. And oregano.
And I planted some more of those, and I've got the great big huge one that's just, the flowers are just starting to open.
Oh yeah, the bees will love that. Another plant that's an annual that tends to recur, and it's maybe a tiny bit on the weedy side, but it has beautiful blue flowers, and that's borage.
How do you spell that?
Borage.
I've heard of that, but I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
They're super easy to grow from seed. It has a slightly fuzzy foliage, and if they're happy, they can get up 3 feet tall. They have a beautiful blue flower, which is edible. They taste like cucumbers, and you can put them in salads and so forth. But the pollinators just really love that particular plant. So I encourage it. And it's one of those things, you buy a package of seeds once, you'll never need to buy them again. They'll just learn to recognize the babies and, save a few here and there.
Hey, Beth,
So Hmm.
Your lavender, have you ever seen anybody take the lavender and they make them into the wands where they
There is something that a friend of mine, this was when I lived in Southern California years and years ago,
uh-huh.
and I don't know which one of us, whether it was me or Joycey, and
Mhm.
found this. It was in a book, and were called lavender bottles.
Oh,
And you took the long flower stem, and you bent it over, and you wove ribbon
right,
in and
right.
out of it, and tied it. Yeah, those are lavender bottles,
Okay.
and I think I still have one in one of my yarn or wool sweater drawers that yeah, I wait to the very end because I want the lavender to go to the bees.
Yes, yes.
And then I take it and sit there watching TV and scoop off the flower heads, and I've got a plastic dishpan that I put them in,
Hmm.
and then I've saved them and made like organdy fabric little bags for
Right.
sachets.
I love sachets. Yes.
I'll have to bring you one.
Yeah, I love lavender.
Oh, I do too.
Great, great.
That's like what we were talking about
Yeah.
on deadheading to trim back the long blossom wand back to where the foliage starts. With that long piece of straw-like material between the flower and where the leaves start. In many varieties, that gives you a good craft material for weaving, for making into wreaths and so forth. It's a very handy handle on the blossom stem.
When you were talking about borage, you said start it from seed. When?
Basically, I mean, you could still plant it now, but because it grows quickly and it's an annual and not particularly fussy about conditions. But ordinarily, you'd probably plant it in the spring. But of course, I know, I mean, I only planted it once, and so the ones that I have, they got planted now when when the flower matured and set the seed, and the seed just lays in the ground over winter and sprouts the following year.
My Alyssum does that, yeah. So how much room do I need per plant and sunlight?
They do want at least half a day of sun, and just think of it as kind of a weedy plant that sort of needs a little bit of help disguising its bare legs and that kind of thing. But they'll get anywhere from a foot and a half tall to 3 feet tall. And I had of course, I was growing it in a tub with really ideal conditions, but it was 3 feet tall and probably close to that wide as well. And just, I mean, I just had seed to sweep up off the deck around it the way it was dropping seeds everywhere. So,
Do you use the leaves for anything?
I think you'd have they're too fuzzy. It's like they talk about comfrey being edible, but even the goats won't eat it. So, I mean,
That tells you a lot.
yeah, with processing, I think they're certainly edible. I mean, if you're starving, by golly, that'd be something I'd go for. But they're fuzzy. Like imagine a peach with bristly fur.
Huh. Okay.
The texture is unappetizing.
Now you said this is an annual, right?
Yes, definitely an annual, but recurrent. I mean, just because it's
So it'll go away in the winter.
right. Yeah, the mother plant will die, and
Okay.
I mean, occasionally you get them to germinate in the winter and try to bloom even super early. Those usually don't make it, and you'll get some pink flowers on the ones that are really temperature stressed like that. Shows that it belongs to the same family as forget-me-nots.
I just got a notification that we have about 10 more minutes on this. I'd set these up to be 30 to 40 minutes when we first started this series. I do know, Dale, that we got 2 questions emailed me today that I want Dale to address real quick. So go ahead, Dale, share those questions.
Okay, first question from Matt Miller. Gardening question, how and when to prune blueberries to guarantee the best yield next year? Mine are starting to grow a bunch of berryless branches. Well, blueberries are in the rhododendron family, so they're not really happy with a lot of pruning, but they can benefit from some guidance pruning. Probably the best time to do it is in the wintertime after the foliage has dropped off so you can really see what you're doing. You'll want to thin out weaker branches, interior branches to kind of open out the form a little bit. And of course, every so often you get those wild, crazy ones that reach for the sky like a car antenna. You can cut those back part way because they're a good strong stem that will branch out, but you don't want to leave that 6-foot whip that sticks up in the air. As for increasing the berry production, by doing a little bit of thinning like that should encourage some fresher growth if that was the problem of the plant, but it may be more of a nutrient issue or a pollination issue as well. If they're not blooming very well in the spring, it may be that they needed an additional feeding. Typically what we do with blueberries is they'll get a nitrogen feeding early in the season when the leaf buds start to come out. Liquid fish would be the organic version. The classic that the commercial growers use is sulfate of ammonia. And then when the flower buds open a little bit later, then you put on a rhododendron type fertilizer. It can be an organic one or a regular or rhododendron type fertilizer. Because blueberries are in the rhodie family, they're sensitive to calcium. So you want to avoid ever using anything like lime or lime sulfur around them. In fact, I'd be even cautious using bone meal around them because of the calcium content in that as well. Although bone meal doesn't seem to be as harmful as some of the other things. And a good feeding program may be helpful in producing that as well. The other thing is when they're in bloom, if you don't see any bees or other insects pollinizing them, that may be the primary issue as well. And planting some additional pollinizer-friendly plants might increase your pollinizers for future years as well. Now, I've got another question was natural ways to get rid of slugs. And slugs are a very common mollusk in these parts, and they're quite successful. And so you're never going to completely get rid of them, but you can set them back a lot. One thing that helps is around particularly vulnerable plants, new seedlings and that sort of thing, clear away any debris and brush so that the slug has to cross open ground to get to the seedling. They don't like to do that. They also don't like to cross absorbent materials. They don't care about sharp. We've seen pictures of a slug crawling right over the edge of a razor blade. Sharp doesn't bother them, but absorbent does. They don't like to cross over wood ash. They don't like to cross over sand. They don't like to cross over the diatomaceous earth. But it's because of the absorbency of those materials, and it just it soaks up their slime, and they don't want to lose their slime. And of course, it works better in dry weather than it does in wet. Collecting slugs is also a good way of going after them. Grapefruit halves, after you've eaten the grapefruit out of it, but set those down on the ground. You can just go out and collect them the next morning, and you'll find that a lot of slugs have gathered inside there. And going after slugs at the key times, early in the spring and again in the fall, you'll reduce the adults that will lay eggs that repopulate and get everything going. Now, there are some slug baits now that are much more non-toxic than they used to be. The old metaldehyde ones were rather hazardous compared to the new iron-based ones. So what I look for in a slug bait, if I'm looking, is that the active ingredient is one of the iron compounds and that they have molasses in it as an attractant bait. And those are safe for pets and kids.
So I'd always heard about putting a little tray of beer out and then they'd go into the beer and drown. Is that?
Yes, beer also will attract them, and they'll drown in it. But you want to make sure that the beer doesn't attract dogs because they can get in and tear things up even worse. Slugs did.
Yeah.
It kind of depends on the situation, but beer does attract them and is effective.
But that's interesting to know about the diatomaceous earth. Did I say it right?
Yes.
I know some folks who actually put a little teaspoon in some water and drink it because they say it's good for your body too. But
Well, it's effective on internal parasites. So if you look at it under a microscope, they're actually an interesting thing. That's kind of not quite a plant, not quite an animal. They have chlorophyll on the inside, but they can move around, and their outer skeleton is made up of quartz, and so they look like a medieval mace head or something with sharp, spiky points on them, made out of glass quartz. And so this sharpness is very effective on soft-bodied and getting to the soft tissue between the plates on insect scales, but it works on internal parasites as well. People oftentimes will give it to their cats and dogs and so forth, and it's quartz, it's non-toxic, but it's extremely sharp. And these internal parasitic worms frequently have very thin outer membranes, and they can be damaged by the sharpness of it, whereas your stomach lining is tough enough that it isn't bothered. So, but there's no chemical benefit to it. It's quartz, it's glass.
So it's all natural.
Yeah, completely natural. But just because something's natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. Back in the day when I started in the garden store, the most toxic poison on the shelf was nicotine sulfate, which is completely organic, but it was the only one that actually had the skull and crossbones on the label. So even though it was organic, it was
that's serious.
The most acutely toxic of all of the chemicals we sold also.
So we have a couple minutes left. Any other questions real quick? Well, I just really want to thank everybody today. And our giveaway today is some sunflower teddy bear seeds from Silver Falls Seed Company. They were very gracious in donating some seeds. So I will be mailing each of you a little pack of some sunflower seeds to grow the little teddy bear sunflowers, and with the instructions and everything. So I like to give a little something to people who come and join us. And they were very gracious, like I said, to donate this. So. And Dale, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Nellie and Beth, nice to see you. Anita.
Thank you. I've missed your classes and your meetings at the senior center. So when I saw that Dale would be your guest today, I thought, I cannot forget this time.
Yeah. I totally
He's
agree.
great. He's great.
Yeah, we love you, Dale. And so thank you, everybody. And have a great weekend.
You too.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.